The tea hit his chest before either of them could stop it. Hot, dark, spreading fast across white fabric that probably cost more than Chiamaka's entire month of groceries. She heard the impact, the soft collision of her shoulder against something immovable, the plastic lid giving way, the sharp intake of breath from a man who clearly was not accustomed to being inconvenienced by anything, let alone a blind woman and her afternoon tea. She didn't panic. Panic was a luxury for people who could afford to freeze. She swept her cane to the left, found the edge of his shoe, and said the only reasonable thing. "I'm so sorry. I didn't hear you in time. You didn't hear me." His voice was low, controlled in the way that things are controlled right before they stop being controlled. "I'm standing on a public street. I know the motorcycle that passed drowned out your footstep. It was an accident." He said nothing. She felt the silence the way she felt most things, as texture, temperature, weight. This silence was hot and it had edges. Her cane was still touching his shoe. She didn't move it. Stillness was information. "Do you have any idea?" he began. "The shirt is expensive," she said. "I can tell by how fast the tea spread. Tight weave, good cotton. I'm genuinely sorry about that." Another silence. Different shape this time. She had surprised him. She felt the slight shift in his breathing, the way his weight redistributed almost imperceptibly from his left foot to his right, like a man who had been leaning into something and just pulled back an inch. Then the anger returned. She felt it come back like a door swinging shut. He stepped closer. Not to help her. She understood the difference. She had spent 26 years learning to separate the people who moved toward her out of concern from the people who moved toward her to establish something. This was the second kind. She heard his hand move, not toward her, but near her, the gesture of a man, demonstrating what he was capable of. Most people would have flinched. Most people could see the look on his face. "So you aren't scared," he said. Chiamaka tilted her head. Her glasses caught the afternoon light. "I would be," she said, "but I'd need to see your face for that to work properly." 4 seconds of absolute silence. Then he walked away. He didn't storm off. He didn't brush past her. He simply left, and the space he had occupied on the pavement went cold immediately the way spaces did when a particular kind of person vacated them. His footsteps were heavy on the right foot and deliberate, and she stood listening to them fade until the street noise swallowed them completely. She pressed her hand flat against the front of her jacket. Her heartbeat was faster than she'd let him hear. She reached into her coat pocket and found her recorder and clicked it on. "Large man. Right foot dominant. Cedar cologne with something metallic underneath, like cold air before rain." He was angry before I touched him. "Expensive taste. Didn't hit me. Didn't expect my voice to stop him." She paused. "Didn't expect me at all." She pocketed the recorder and found her direction and kept moving. 6 blocks north, she stopped outside a building she had been mapping for 3 weeks. A narrow-fronted art house on a street that smelled of pine resin and old money. She knew the logo from her father's documents, Jang Cultural Properties. She had stood on this exact spot 4 times now, fingers on the strap of her father's satchel, telling herself she would go in tomorrow. Tomorrow. Again. She turned away, but her hand didn't leave the strap. If you're already gripped, subscribe right now, because where this story goes next, you won't want to miss a single second. Jang Tae-oh did not look back. He told himself this firmly as he turned the corner and his 2 men fell into step 20 paces behind him. He did not look back at the woman on the pavement, did not think about the completely level quality of her voice, did not register the particular stillness she held when she tilted her head toward him. None of that was information he needed. What he needed was to get through the next 14 days without committing a crime against his own father. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Han Soo-yeon, the 18th message today. He put the phone back in his pocket without opening it. Soo-yeon had been outside his building again this morning, standing perfectly still on the pavement across the street, like a painting he hadn't commissioned and couldn't return. His father called her devoted. Tae-oh called her a surveillance operation wearing a woman's face, though he hadn't fully articulated why yet. The arranged marriage was in 13 days now. His father, Jang Tae-oh, had used the word countdown on their call this morning, as if Tae-oh were a missile being prepared for launch. The alliance with the Han family would extend the organization's reach into 3 new provinces and legitimize 2 financial channels that currently required significant creative accounting. His father had explained this with the patient tone of a man explaining arithmetic to a child. Tae-oh had listened and said nothing and hung up and walked out of his apartment into a Hongdae street, where a blind woman had immediately destroyed his shirt. He stopped walking. His men stopped behind him without a word. The memory arrived the way it always did, without permission, without warning, in the specific register of his sister's voice. "You look like you're trying to frighten the air, Tae-oh. The air isn't scared of you either." Jang Ara, 23 years old when the rival gang found her. His fault, people said, though not to his face. His world, his enemies, his consequence. She had been blind since 17, a car accident he had not been able to prevent, that had carved a particular shape of guilt into him that no amount of subsequent violence had managed to reduce. After Ara, every piece of him that might have chosen a different life closed like a fist. He became what he was because what he was could protect what he loved. Except he hadn't. He hadn't protected her. The anger had nowhere useful to go, and so it became the atmosphere he lived in, the way some men lived in grief or ambition. Tae-oh lived in controlled fury, and it kept everyone at exactly the right distance. Except a blind woman on a Hongdae pavement who couldn't see his face had held completely still and told him a joke. He walked on. He didn't glance back. He almost did. In a building across the city, Jang Tae-oh received a report and set it face down on his desk and poured tea, and looked out at Seoul and thought about the shape of patience. The report concerned a Nigerian woman named Chiamaka, 28, art fellowship, questions circling the Hongdae house. Her father's name had surfaced in a cross-reference 3 days ago. The analyst had flagged her low priority. Cheol-soo changed the rating to medium without explanation and told no one, including his son. He was not a man who believed in coincidence. He believed in timing, and timing, in his experience, was either yours or it was already working against you. He picked up his phone, made a call, said simply, "Watch her. Everything. Report only to me." That evening, Chiamaka sat at a pojangmatcha 2 streets from her apartment and ordered a bowl she navigated by smell and heat and the weight of the spoon. The tent was warm. She had found this place in her 2nd week in Seoul by following the smell of broth through a cold evening and had been returning since. The ajumma who ran it had stopped trying to help her sit down after the 3rd visit and now simply confirmed usual spot and let her be, which Chiamaka deeply appreciated. She was replaying the art house exterior in her mind, the step up at the entrance, the hinges on the left side, the specific frequency the door made when the wind pushed it, when the stool 2 seats down accepted new weight. Heavy, right foot dominant. She knew before the cedar smell reached her. She didn't turn her head. "2 stools away," she said. Again. A pause. "I didn't choose this place for the company." "Neither did I, yet here we both are." She lifted her spoon. "You can sit somewhere else." He didn't move. She ate. He ordered without consulting the menu. The ajumma served him with the efficiency of someone who knew better than to make conversation. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable. Chiamaka was good at silence. She had needed to become good at silence because silence was where most of her information lived. "Your tea ruined my shirt," he said finally. "You were in my path." "I'm always in my path. Other people move." "That sounds exhausting." Something shifted in the air between them. He was looking at her. She could sense the direction of his attention, the way she sensed a lamp's heat. Steady and focused, and not what she expected from a man whose first instinct had been to demonstrate violence. "What are you doing in Seoul?" he said. "Eating." "Before that?" "Fellowship, Contemporary Art Foundation." She took another spoonful. What are you doing in Seoul? I live here. Then you're well ahead of me. A pause. Then, you don't move like someone who can't see. I move like someone who learned how to. She set her spoon down. There's a difference. One is about limitation. The other is about method. He said nothing for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed fractionally. Still controlled. But the hard edges had pulled back. You mapped this street. I map everywhere I go more than once. Measurement, memory, repetition. She angled her head slightly, the way she did when she wanted the full dimension of a response. You move like you expect everything to push back. Most things do, and when they don't, he didn't answer. She heard him leave money on the counter, more than his meal cost, judging from the ajuma's small sound of satisfaction. He stood. The shirt, he said. Don't worry about it. He left without saying goodbye. She sat for a moment after his footsteps dissolved into the city and told herself this was nothing. A street collision and a coincidence of dinner spots. Seoul was 10 million people. Running into the same man twice meant nothing except that they shared a neighborhood and apparently the same taste for affordable food. She clicked the recorder on. Cedar and cold. Came back, stayed longer than he intended to, paid for my meal without announcing it. A pause. Doesn't know I know that. She pocketed the recorder. The bowl was empty. She sat another minute in the warm tent, in the noise of the city she had learned to read like a second language, and thought about her father, and the art house 6 blocks away, and the document sewn into the satchel lining that she had been carrying for 2 years without showing a single person. Tomorrow, she told herself again. She almost believed it this time. 4 days passed. On the first day, Tae-oh handled a Shin network incursion into a supply channel he'd considered clean, which required 2 meetings, 1 explicit threat, and a phone call that resolved the matter with enough finality that the Shin representative would not need to be contacted again. On the second day, his father sent a formal invitation to a dinner celebrating the forthcoming Han Alliance, written on paper stock chosen to convey inevitability. On the third day, Soo-yeon appeared outside the Pojangmacha at 7 in the evening and sat across from Chiamaka and introduced herself as a graduate student interested in African contemporary art, which was the smoothest constructed lie Chiamaka had heard since arriving in Seoul. On the fourth day, Chiamaka walked into Jang Cultural Properties. She presented her fellowship credentials at the front desk and asked for an accessibility tour, which the foundation was legally obligated to provide, and which most institutions provided badly. The assistant who walked her through was nervous in a way that manifested as over-description. And here on your left we have a piece from the early collection. Very significant. The artist was and Chiamaka absorbed all of it while her actual attention tracked the ambient sounds, the acoustics, the spatial layout assembling itself in the back of her mind, and the conversation happening at low volume between 2 staff members near a doorway 20 feet away. She heard her father's name, not spoken aloud. It was in a reference number the 2 staff members were checking against a system. She caught the syllables in the Yoruba-Korean mixed document code her father had used for his privately brokered pieces, a reference style specific enough to be unmistakable. Her thumb found the recorder in her coat pocket and clicked it. On, without any conscious decision, behind the action. The tour ended. She thanked the assistant, walked out. Outside, she stood against the wall and breathed and did not let her face do anything in particular. Her hand found the satchel strap. Inside the lining, sewn into the leather with her father's careful stitching, was a ledger containing 8 years of financial records, contracted movements, and 1 specific entry dated to a week in October that connected a shipment authorization to a name she had not been able to fully verify until now. She had a name. She had a building. She had a recording she hadn't listened to yet. She thought about cedar and cold, about a man who moved like everything pushed back and left money on counters without announcing it. She thought, I need to understand what I'm walking into before it closes around me. She had maybe 3 days before whoever ran this building noticed the fellowship woman with the satchel and the recorder. She knew this because her father had told her, in the last phone call they ever shared, exactly how much time a person had when they started asking the right questions in the wrong places. 3 days. None of them used yet. She started walking, past the Pojangmatcha without stopping, to the small park near her apartment where she sat on a bench and listened to the recording. Background noise, the nervous assistant's commentary, her own footsteps on marble, then from the doorway 20 feet away, 2 voices, and beneath them a third, a phone call in the room beyond, a voice she didn't recognize, and a sentence that hit her sternum like something solid. The ease documentation stays buried. If the woman asks about the October collection, you tell her it was never logged. You tell her it doesn't exist. She played it back twice. Then she sat very still and let the city move around her and thought about her father's hands when he stitched that ledger into the leather. The careful, unhurried stitching of a man who understood he was running out of time. Park Do-jin put the file on Tae-oh's desk at 8 the following morning and stepped back to the correct distance and waited. Do-jin had served Tae-oh for 7 years with the particular skill of being completely present in a room while occupying as little of it as possible. He watched Tae-oh open the file, watched his face, watched the precise moment of recognition, a fractional pause in the page turn, a stillness that lasted half a second before Tae-oh continued reading. "How long has she been in the building?" Tae-oh asked. "She visited once. Yesterday, fellowship credentials, standard tour." Do-jin paused. "Her father's reference number came up in a cross-match last week. I ran it against the October files." Another pause, longer this time. "It matches." Tae-oh turned a page. "Where is she now?" "Her apartment. She hasn't moved since last night." The satchel. Never puts it down, sleeps with it beside her. Based on surveillance. Tae-oh closed the file, sat with both hands flat on the desk the way he did when making a decision he'd technically already reached, but needed to confirm. Do-jin had seen this gesture perhaps 40 times. He waited. "Bring a car, not an official one." The Art Foundation's lobby was quiet at 11 in the morning. Tae-oh walked in the way he walked everywhere, like the space had already agreed to accommodate him. The receptionist started to speak. He asked for Chiamaka Eze, and the receptionist understood from his expression that this was not a question, and picked up the phone. Chiamaka came down in 4 minutes. He heard the cane on the stairs before he saw her. She came through the door into the lobby and oriented toward him almost immediately. The cedar, he understood now, catalogued on day 1, and her expression was exactly what it had been on the street. Composed. Ready. "You work fast," she said. "You're connected to something I need to understand." "So am I." She angled her face toward him. "Are we talking here?" He glanced at the receptionist, who was very deliberately looking at nothing. "No." They sat across from each other in the back of the car, Do-jin driving, Seoul scrolling past windows she couldn't see. She held the satchel across her knees. He watched her hands on the strap. Not anxious, deliberate. The hands of someone who had thought carefully about this exact moment. "Tell me your name," she said. "Your full name." Jang Tae-oh. The silence that followed was its own specific thing. He watched her process it. The way people absorbed his name was one of the most reliable data points available. Fear, recognition, blankness, calculation. Hers was recognition, then immediate recalibration. A woman updating a map in real time. "The art house," she said, "is mine. Yes. My father brokered a private collection through that house 8 years ago." Her voice didn't waver. "He was dead 4 months later. The official report said accident. The shipping documents he left say something different." "What do the documents say?" "That the collection he moved wasn't art. That it was documentation, evidence. That someone needed it buried, and my father was the mechanism and then the liability." She paused. What do your files say? He held her gaze. She couldn't see it, but she was already angled to hear everything. My files say your father moved something belonging to my organization, that the movement was sanctioned by someone senior, that the record was closed internally 8 years ago. A pause. I didn't close it. I wasn't running operations at 22. But your world did it. Yes. She absorbed that. He watched her jaw set and release, the only visible signal of what was moving beneath. Then, what's in the October file? He didn't answer immediately. The car moved through a tunnel. Light changed. Something I haven't fully opened yet, he said, which was more honest than he'd planned to be. She caught it immediately. You haven't opened it because of what you think it contains. I don't avoid things. You just told me you haven't opened a file connected to your own organization. The tunnel ended. Seoul came back, gray and enormous and full of histories he had authored, or inherited, or both. The October file connects to my sister, he said. She died 11 years ago. I've been operating on one version of that story for 11 years. I think the version is wrong. Chiamaka was quiet for a moment. Then she turned toward him fully, not quite at him, but close, the way she positioned when she wanted to hear every layer. I have a recording from the art house, background capture, a voice instructing staff to bury anything connected to the October collection if I came asking. He went very still. Whose voice? He said. I don't know it yet. She reached into her bag and placed the recorder between them. Do you? He took it, plugged in a single earphone, listened. The voice came through partially obscured by distance and ambient noise. Partially was enough. He had grown up shaped by that voice the way stone is shaped by water, slowly, completely, in ways that couldn't be reversed. He handed the recorder back. His face was stone. She heard the shift in his breathing, not losing control, but changing gear, an engine finding a different register. Tae-oh, I'm here. Whose voice? Mine to handle. I brought you the recording. You don't get to take it and disappear. Her voice hadn't risen by a single degree. That was more forceful than volume would have been. My father is dead. This connects us. Tell me whose voice. My father's. The car moved through Seoul. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Your father buried the evidence mine was carrying. It appears that way. And your sister. I don't know yet. I need to confirm. Then we confirm it together. Not a question. Not a request. He looked at her hands on the satchel strap, the absolute stillness of her. He thought about the street and the tea and how she had stood completely still while he demonstrated what he was capable of and hadn't moved a centimeter. He thought about his sister's voice. The air isn't scared of you either, and felt something in his chest shift in a way he had no name for and didn't search for one. Together, he said. That night, Soo-yeon sent a message to a contact number stored under no recognizable name in her phone. 3 lines, a description of the car, the foundation, the satchel. The contact replied with one word, confirmed. She set the phone down and sat in the dark and looked at the objects on her desk, the notebook, the photographs, the 2 years of careful pattern documentation on a man she had been assigned to monitor. She had performed devotion so convincingly, she had briefly confused herself into something adjacent to genuine feeling, which was the professional hazard she'd been warned about and dismissed and now understood completely. The blind woman complicated everything. Soo-yeon had sent the message because she was supposed to. She watched the confirmation on her screen and felt something that wasn't guilt and wasn't loyalty and lived exactly between them like a stone she couldn't move. She opened the notebook, stared at it, closed it. The contact would move now. She had 3 days before a decision arrived that couldn't be unmade. She sat in the dark and counted them one by one. Dojin came to Tae-oh's apartment at midnight. He had been waiting to come for 2 years, and carried the particular exhaustion of a man who has been holding something heavy long past the point where putting it down felt like a real option. "Tell me what you know," Tae-oh said. He didn't offer tea. He stood by the window and gave Dojin the room to choose where to begin. Dojin began at the beginning, the sisters' attack, the rival gangs, contract, the source, a second-generation contact, unverified but from someone Dojin trusted with the weight of his own career. He didn't name the person who issued the contract immediately. He said, someone inside the organization, senior, someone with a specific reason to eliminate a liability. Ara was not a liability. She was to someone who needed you to have nothing left to protect except the organization. Dojun's voice stayed level. He had rehearsed this moment for 3 months. Someone who understood that a man with nothing personal to lose is a man who might one day walk away. The silence that followed had a particular shape. Not the silence of shock. The silence of a thing already suspected arriving as confirmation. "My father," Tae-oh said. Dojin said nothing, which was the same as yes. Tae-oh walked from the window to the table. He sat down. He placed both hands flat on the surface and looked at them, and breathed the way he had trained himself to breathe, when the thing in his chest threatened to become something that destroyed rooms. He stayed with it. He let it move through him without letting it take him over. "You've known for 2 years," he said. "I suspected for 2 years. I confirmed 3 months ago." Dojun's voice didn't shake. He had prepared for every version of this response. "You didn't know how to tell me my father had my sister killed." "No, I didn't." Another silence. This one had a shape like rubble, like something that had been standing a long time and was now just debris on the floor. "The E's woman's father," Tae-oh said. "The October documentation. It connects directly." "Yes. What her father was carrying, the ledger, it contains the financial authorization for the contract on Ara, the one piece of evidence traceable back to the source. Her father was supposed to move it through the art house, and then disappear it permanently." Dojin paused. "He developed a conscience at the wrong moment. And my father developed impatience." "Yes." Tae-oh stood, returned to the window. Seoul was lit and enormous, and had no idea what was being decided in this room. He thought about Chiamaka in her apartment with the satchel she never set down, navigating a city that had been trying to swallow her father's truth for 8 years. He thought about Ara's laugh, the cane on the marble floor. "You look like you're trying to frighten the air." "Get me the October file," he said. "Not the clean version, everything." This is the moment in the story where everything either breaks or becomes unbreakable. Don't look away. The night Tae-oh came to her apartment, he didn't call first. She heard his knock. 3 times, unhurried even, and recognized it from the 2 previous times he'd stood at her door. She filed everything. She opened the door. "Something went wrong," she said, not a question. "One of my younger men, Ambw, Shin Network, he's alive." A pause that carried weight. "He's 17. She stepped back. He came in. She moved through the apartment without her cane. Fluid, precise. Every wall and chair leg and corner edge mapped internally from her first week in the space. She heard him stop moving behind her as he watched. "You don't use it in here," he said. "I mapped the apartment before I unpacked my clothes. Every surface, every obstacle." She reached the kitchen. "Sit wherever you want. I'll know where you are." She made tea. He sat. She located him by the acoustic change the window chair created when occupied and brought 2 cups across and slid one toward him until her fingertips confirmed it was within reach. "You came here because a 17-year-old reminded you of something specific," she said. "He was the age Ara was before the accident." She held her cup in both hands and waited. "She was funnier than me," he said. "Much funnier. She had this way of landing the most precise observation about a person in the fewest possible words, and she did it without cruelty, which I never fully understood because precision usually requires some." He paused. After the accident, she didn't spend time mourning herself. She was angrier on my behalf than her own. She kept saying I needed someone who wasn't afraid of me. She said it into the air like she was making a formal request. Into the air. She believed the universe was listening. I told her the universe was a physical phenomenon with no operational capacity for requests. A beat. She told me that sounded like something a frightened person would say. She was right. He held that for a beat. Usually, tell me the rest, Chiamaka said. Not the version you give people, the real one. His gaze settled on her. She couldn't see it. She was the only person in my entire life who treated the monster like a costume, he said. Everyone else believed the costume was the person underneath. After long enough, it becomes difficult to tell the difference yourself. She set her cup down, turned her face toward him fully. I don't believe the costume is the person, she said, plainly, without any performance behind it. I have never seen your face. I hear you. I hear how you talk about a 17-year-old boy you could have left on a street corner. I hear how you talk about your sister. She paused. What came to my door tonight was not a monster. He was very still. She felt the direction of his attention like pressure in the air. She turned her face slightly off angle the way she did when she wanted to catch every frequency, and he reached out, slowly, no urgency in it, and brought her face toward him with 2 fingers beneath her jaw. Neither of them moved for a long moment. Then he closed the distance and kissed her, and it was quiet the way things are when they have been inevitable, long enough that the arrival feels less like surprise and more like recognition. When it ended, she stayed close. His forehead came down to hers. She said, "You came here frightened." "Yes." "Are you still?" "Different kind now." A pause. "Worse kind." She understood exactly what he meant. The worst kind was voluntary. They had walked toward each other with full awareness of what it cost. Her in the dark, him in the complete illuminated knowledge of what wanting something meant in his world. And arrived here anyway. Wanting something was a vulnerability. Wanting someone was a target. She thought about the satchel by the bed, about the recording, about love as the specific cruelty of being the person required to break someone open. She said, "Stay until it's light." He stayed. At 3 in the morning, she woke to her own recorder running from the bag on the floor. She reached for it, and in the ambient capture from the art house visit, she heard something she had missed the first time. A background call, further from the mic, a voice she did recognize this time, and a sentence she had to play back, 3 times to be certain she'd heard correctly. "The October shipment authorization is in the ease documentation. When you find the woman, you find the ledger. When you find the ledger, bring it directly to me, not to my son." She lay without moving. Tae-oh's breathing was steady beside her. She listened to the recording once more. "Not to my son." She thought about the man sleeping in her apartment who had built a decade of grief on a story his father had manufactured and maintained like infrastructure. She thought about what she was holding and what it would do to him when she put it in his hands. She thought about love as the precise cruelty of being the person who has to break someone open so they can finally breathe. She clicked the recorder off. Lay in the dark. At some point, she slept. She played it for him in the morning without introduction. Set the recorder between the teacups and pressed play, and listened through the part of her that had always watched faces, through the acoustic shape of his breath, the silence that followed, the infinitesimal shift of the chair as his body absorbed the sentence. "Not to my son." "That's your father," she said. "Yes." "He's known about the ledger for years. He's known about you since before you walked into the art house." He stopped. "Dojin had information I should have received 3 months ago. I confirmed it last night after you slept." "What information?" He told her about Ara, the full version, the contract, the source, The specific architecture of a man who had systematically removed everything from his son's life that might pull him toward a different choice, until the organization was the only thing left with any claim on him. Chiamaka sat through all of it without moving. When he finished, she said, "Your father killed my father." Not directly. I know exactly how this world assigns work. Same thing. Yes, he said. Same thing. She nodded once. Not agreement. Acknowledgement. The nod of a woman receiving something she intended to carry without dropping. He watched her do it and felt something in his chest break quietly. In a chamber that had been sealed so long he had forgotten what the door looked like. "The ledger," she said. "You need to see it." She opened the satchel. Her fingers found the interior seam and traced it to the section of stitching her father had made different from the rest. She had measured the variation 100 times, memorized the precise location, the way she memorized everything she couldn't afford to lose. She unpicked it carefully and removed a folded document in thin archive material. 8 pages, her father's handwriting dense and precise. She handed it to him. He took it and read. She waited. She heard him turn pages, heard the change in his breathing when he reached the October entry. A shift that had no description except the sound of a foundation giving way. "He signed it himself," Tae-oh said. "The contract on Ara. He used a proxy, but the authorization carries his operational cipher." A pause that lasted too long. "I designed that cipher for him. When I was 19, he said it was for protecting the family's legitimate interests." What followed was a silence with its own geography. "Tae-oh, I'm fine. You are not fine." "No." His voice was steady in the way that things are steady when everything underneath has already moved. "But I will be, once I've finished what needs finishing." She sat with that for a moment. The apartment was quiet. Then she said, "There's something else. Something I haven't told you." He waited. "I came to Seoul following my father's trail. That part you know. What you don't know is that I didn't lose my sight from birth. I lost it at 2 years old." She paused. "In Lagos. In a vehicle caught in crossfire during a territorial dispute over a shipping route. My mother was in that vehicle with me. She walked out. I didn't." She set her cup down very carefully on the table. "I ran the cross-reference myself 3 weeks before I flew to Seoul. The route, the date, the organization involved." Another pause. Longer. It came back to the Yang network, a junior operation, a disputed channel. Nobody ordered my blinding specifically. It was what your world calls collateral. The silence that followed was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of something much worse, of a man realizing that the machinery he had maintained and fed and justified had reached further than he knew, and touched things he could never have anticipated and could not now undo. "How long have you known it was my organization?" he said. "Since I arrived in Seoul." "You knew when you sat down at the pojangmatcha?" "Yes." "You knew when you got in the car?" "Yes." "Chiamaka." His voice had gone to a register she had never heard from him before. Not anger, not the controlled fury she had catalogued from day one. Something beneath all of that. Something with no armor over it. "Why didn't you—" "Because I needed to know if the man and the empire were the same thing." She turned her face toward him fully. "I had already decided that one accident committed by a junior operation 26 years ago was not the sum of a person. I had already decided I wasn't here for revenge. I came here for truth." She let that land. "But I needed to know, once I found you, whether you were worth the decision I had already made. Whether the person I was starting to know was real, or just the face the monster wore when it wanted something." He said nothing for a long time. "And," he said finally, "you paid for a stranger's dinner and didn't announce it. You came to my door because a 17-year-old boy frightened you and you had nowhere else to take it. You told me the truth about your father before you knew what it would cost you." She paused. "The man and the empire are not the same thing." I confirmed that. That's why I'm still in this apartment. He stood, walked to the window, stood with his back to her and his hands at his sides, and she heard his breathing. Not controlled, not the trained regulation she had learned to read. Uncontrolled. Real. The sound of a man absorbing something too large for any preparation to cover. I can't give you back what was taken, he said. I know that. I can't fix it. I can't make a payment or remove a scar or... Tae-oh. Her voice was quiet and direct and stopped him completely. I'm not asking you to fix it. I'm telling you what happened so that there are no more gaps between us. So that when everything comes apart in the next few days, there isn't a truth sitting underneath it that neither of us named. She paused. I named it. Now you know. Now we move forward without it between us. He turned from the window. She couldn't see his face. She didn't need to. She heard everything she needed in the quality of his silence. Not the silence of a man retreating, but the silence of a man deciding to stay inside something difficult instead of managing it from a distance. I'm sorry, he said. 2 words, no architecture around them, no qualifier or condition. Just that. I know, she said. I believe you. She reached across the table and her hand found his forearm with the accuracy she always had in her own mapped space. Now sit down. We have work to finish and I need you thinking clearly. He sat. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you are the most frightening person I have ever encountered. You're a Korean Mafia boss who makes grown men leave rooms. I know what I said, she almost smiled. It was the closest thing to peace either of them had felt in days. It lasted about 4 seconds before his phone vibrated on the table and Do-jun's name appeared on the screen, and the 4 seconds ended and the work resumed. Now, here is what will split every comment section this story touches. Some of you are about to say Chiamaka should have walked out that door, right there. And maybe you're right. Keep watching. What needed finishing did not wait to be scheduled. It arrived. At 4 that afternoon, 2 men approached Chiamaka on the street between the foundation and the coffee shop she visited on Tuesdays. She was 20 meters from the foundation entrance when she heard them. 2 pairs of footsteps, bracketing her from slightly different angles, the precision of people who had rehearsed the geometry. Not aggressive in their movement. That was the detail that mattered. Aggressive meant urgency. This was methodical. She stopped and turned her head slowly. Miss Ease, the voice carried professional apology. We need your bag. My bag, she said. Just the bag. You won't be harmed. She heard his weight transfer to his right foot, preparing to reach. Her hand tightened on the strap. Do you know how many conversations I've recorded in this city in the past 6 weeks? She said. The man paused. Her phone was already in her other hand. She had pressed the contact 3 seconds before he spoke. She said clearly, into it. 2 men, street outside the foundation. They want the satchel. She heard the first man's foot move, then something else, a car door hitting its frame. Fast footsteps, heavy, right foot dominant, crossing the space between her and the approaching man with the absolute authority of someone who had never once in his adult life considered the possibility of being blocked. What followed was brief. 2 impacts, sequential. Weight meeting pavement, a short exchange in Korean that functioned as statement rather than conversation. Then silence. Then Tae-oh was beside her and his hand found hers and she gripped it without any performance about the fact that her hand was shaking. 2, he said. Are they dead? No. Then we have approximately 4 hours before whoever sent them sends replacements. He studied her face. How do you know the timeline? My father operated in this world for 3 years before he was killed. I learned the math. She found her direction. Bring the car. We're not coming back here tonight. She was right about the 4 hours. He was ready before they expired. He spent them doing what 11 years had made him exceptional at, moving pieces, placing calls, collapsing the architecture of a thing with such efficiency that by the time it fell, the falling was almost quiet. Dojin drove. Tae-oh sat in the back with Chiamaka, and the satchel and the ledger, and the recording, and 11 years of manufactured grief, and the knowledge that he was about to enter a room with his father for the last time. "I'm coming in," she said. "No." "He had my father killed, which is exactly why you stay outside." He paused. "This isn't about protecting you. It's precision. Your presence in that room gives him leverage. Your absence removes the last tool he has." She sat with that. "You're going to take it apart, not just him, the whole structure." "Yes, because it was never protecting anything real." "No," he said, "it wasn't." She found his hand in the moving dark. He turned his palm up and held hers, and they stayed like that, not speaking. Seoul, blurring past outside. The room was a private floor in one of the Yang buildings, clean and high and full of afternoon light. Cheol-soo was already there. He had the bearing of a man who had received preliminary intelligence and was performing calm at a high level of competence. Tae-oh recognized the performance. He had learned it from the same source. He put the ledger on the table, his phone with the recording beside it. He sat across from his father and brought the full weight of everything Cheol-soo had built him to be, every year of controlled fury, every technique of intimidation, the complete stillness that had kept enemies at distance for a decade, and aimed it directly across that table. "Tell me why," Tae-oh said. Cheol-soo looked at the ledger, looked at his son. He began speaking, and Tae-oh let him speak, because the speaking mattered, not for himself, but for Dojin witnessing in the corner, for the phone recording running in his pocket, for the record that would outlast this room. Cheol-soo spoke about vision, legacy, an organization as a structure that outlasts its individual members and demands calculations that personal feeling makes impossible. He spoke about aura with the careful clinical distance of a man describing a resource allocation decision. He did not flinch. He had sealed the room inside himself where flinching lived so long ago that he no longer remembered where the door was. Tae-oh let him finish. Then, "You built me to protect something you had already destroyed. I built you to carry something beyond both of us. You built me to carry your crimes in my hands and your grief across my face so no one would ever look closely enough to see the difference between the two." Cheol-soo said nothing. "I'm going to dismantle it," Tae-oh said. "Not with violence. I'm going to pull the criminal infrastructure out of every legitimate channel and hand the documentation to the people who handle this professionally, and let the process run." He paused. "You won't be in the building when it happens. You won't be in this city. You would destroy what I built. You didn't build it for me. You built it to contain me." Tae-oh stood. "There's a difference. I learned it from a woman who has never seen my face and still isn't afraid of me." He walked out. Dojin followed. The door closed with the sound of a breath that had been held for 11 years. In the car, Dojin said, "There's something else." Tae-oh waited. The organization that was contracted for Aura. Dojin's voice was careful in the way of a man delivering something he has rehearsed without ever feeling ready. The contract wasn't for elimination. It was for disappearance, institutional placement. Her memory was deliberately damaged. He stopped. "She's been in a facility in Gyeonggi-do for 11 years. Her memory is fractured in places, but she is alive." The city moved past outside. Tae-oh sat with both hands in his lap, and his face composed in a way that was no longer the trained composure of a man controlling himself, but the stillness of a man whose entire internal landscape had just rearranged itself around a single fact. "Take me there," he said. The room had white walls and clean light, and the antiseptic quality of places that worked hard to feel like somewhere other than what they were. Ara was at the window when he walked in, smaller than his memory of her, though he knew she wasn't. It was only what 11 years of grief had done to the image. She turned toward the door and he looked at her face, and his face did nothing, nothing at all, because the alternative was something he could not afford in this room. She looked at him. Recognition came in pieces, the way her memory worked now. fractured, reassembling, arriving in the wrong sequence. Then, Tae-oh. I'm here, he said. He sat beside her. She put her hand in his. He held it and looked at the window and the light coming through it and felt the specific quality of this silence. Not the silence of grief, which he knew intimately, but something different. The silence of a thing that had been lost so long the possibility of finding it had stopped seeming real. He had built 11 years of purpose on the architecture of her absence. The purpose was gone. The absence was gone. He was sitting in a room with his sister, and he had nothing prepared for this because he had never once, in 11 years, allowed himself to prepare for it. He had always known that hope in his world was a liability. He understood now that the alternative, the sealing off, the closing down, the controlled fury maintained as atmosphere, had cost him more than the thing it was meant to prevent. He thought about Chiamaka in her apartment right now, recorder, on the table, moving through a mapped space with the particular fluid precision of a woman who had turned limitation into method, who had known his world hurt her, and come looking anyway. Not for revenge, not for resolution, but for truth. Who had sat across from him with a secret that could have been a weapon, and chosen instead to make it a bridge. He thought. She built the whole map in the dark. And she still walked forward. 6 months is enough time for certain things to become permanent. Tae-oh spent those months doing exactly what he had said he would do, dismantling the architecture carefully, the way a man can only dismantle something he built himself because he knows every joint and every load-bearing point. The legitimate businesses survived, restructured, cleaned. The criminal infrastructure became documentation in the hands of people whose job was to do something with it, which they did. Cheol-soo was removed. The precise nature of his removal left to the processes now turning, which had their own momentum and would reach their own conclusion in their own time. Soo-yeon came to Tae-oh before it was fully over. She sat across from him in a room that had been cleared of everything except a table and 2 chairs and the specific quality of silence that arrives when all the pretense has already left. I was assigned to you 2 years ago, she said. Your father approached my family. The devotion, the messages, the appearances outside your building, all constructed. The goal was to monitor your movements and flag any sign that you were developing independent alliances or considering a challenge to his authority. She looked at him directly. You were never supposed to find out. The marriage arrangement was the final mechanism. Once you were married into an allied family your father controlled, your leverage would be permanently limited. Tae-oh listened to all of it with his hands flat on the table and his expression unreadable. The blind woman, Soo-yeon continued. When I saw you with her, I took a photograph and forwarded it to my contact. That contact was not your father directly. It was a handler your father used for sensitive operations. When I sent that image, I made it possible for your father to identify her as a target. Her voice did not shake. She had decided to tell the full truth, and the full truth required a steady voice. The men who approached her on the street outside the foundation were dispatched because of my report. I know, Tae-oh said. She stopped. I confirmed the chain 3 days ago. I've been waiting to see if you would come. He paused. You came. That matters. Not enough to change what happened, but it matters. I don't expect anything from you, she said. I came because it needed to be said aloud in front of you, not discovered in a file afterward. I owed her that. I owed you that. He was quiet for a long moment. Were any of the 2 years real? She sat with a question. Some of it, she said finally. The part that was real was the part that made the rest of it harder. She stood. I hope she stays in Seoul. I hope you both do. He said, Go. She left. The look she gave him from the doorway was complicated enough that no single word would have served it. Not guilt, not relief, not closure. Something that lived between all three, and didn't have a name yet, the way some things don't until enough time has passed to give them one. Ara came to Seoul in stages, the way a person returns to themselves after damage. Not all at once, but in pieces, in the order the pieces became available. Her memory was fractured in some rooms, and fully intact in others, and she navigated the geography of her own mind with the particular steady patience of a woman who had always been better at interior mapping than anyone around her recognized. She began attending sessions at an accessibility foundation on the east side of the city. 3 weeks into those sessions, she met a Nigerian woman with a white cane and a recorder and an absolute gift for stillness. They talked about art and soul and the specific experience of moving through a world calibrated for a different kind of perception. Ara laughed at something Chiamaka said, the same laugh, the one Tae-oh had not heard in 11 years, helpless and certain, and aimed squarely at the universe's ongoing improbability. When Ara finally understood who Chiamaka was, she took her face in both hands. "I told him," she said. "For years I said it into the air. He needed someone who wasn't afraid of him. I genuinely did not think the universe was taking notes." "The universe," Chiamaka said, "has questionable methods." "But reasonable outcomes," Ara said. Chiamaka thought about cedar and cold, and a man who expected everything to push back. She thought about knocked-over tea and a stool 2 seats away, and money left on a counter without a word about it. She thought about the dark of her apartment, and a hand turning her face, and a question she had asked in the quiet, after something inevitable. "Are you still frightened?" Different kind. Worse kind. She understood it completely now. The worst kind was the kind you chose. The kind you walked toward with your eyes open, knowing precisely what it cost. Her father had carried that kind of frightened when he stitched the ledger into the lining. She had carried it every day since landing in Seoul. It was the only fear that meant anything. She underwent the procedure alone. She had spoken to the specialist 3 months earlier and received the assessment. Partial restoration, shapes and light. Not full clarity. Never full clarity. And had made the appointment and kept it without telling anyone. Not her aunt, not Ara, not Tae-oh. She went in at 7 in the morning and came out at 11 and sat in the clinic's recovery room, while her newly partial vision adjusted to its unfamiliar capacity, and the world became blur and shape and light she had no vocabulary for because she had lost her sight at 2, and everything arriving now was without precedent. She did not cry. She sat and mapped it the only way she knew how. New information, new method. The way light moved differently from sound. She raised her hands in front of her face and saw them, blurred, softened at the edges, unmistakably hers, and stayed with that for a long time. A week later, she walked into the space where Tae-oh was standing. He was at the window, light behind him, a shape, tall and still, and carrying the posture of someone braced permanently for something to go wrong. She stopped in the doorway and looked at him before he heard her. She looked at the outline of his jaw, the dark of his hair, the specific way he stood that she had catalogued 100 times through sound and never through sight until this moment. She looked at him the way she had always known him, in the dark, now with this added to it. And then he turned, saw her, crossed the room without hurrying. She let him come all the way. He reached her and stopped and looked at her face the way he always did. Full, steady, the attention that most people eventually looked away from and she had never needed to. He reached out by habit and turned her face toward him with 2 fingers under her jaw. She said, "You look exactly like you sound." Something moved behind his eyes. What? Cedar and cold. Sharp jaw. You stand like something is permanently about to go wrong. She tipped her head. I was right about every single part of it. He studied her face for a long moment. Then he pulled her into him and she let him, and her hands came up to his face the way they always had, mapping, confirming, adding the new layer of information to everything already known. He stayed perfectly still the way he did whenever she did this. He had learned early that this was not something to interrupt. She had mapped him completely in the dark. She had known him before she could see him. The light was new. It changed nothing that had already been decided. She said against his chest, "I looked at you before you knew I was in the room." He pulled back slightly. "How long?" "Long enough." "Chiamaka, I wanted to know you in the dark first." She looked up at him, blurred and real and entirely familiar. "I did. Now this is just more." He held her face in both hands and looked at her the way he had looked at very few things in his life, without strategy, without the glass he kept between himself and anything he valued. She felt the quality of it shift, felt him stop waiting for something to go wrong. "You can stop bracing," she said. "Old habit." "I know." She covered his hands with hers. "I'll remind you when you forget." Outside, Seoul was gray and enormous, and entirely indifferent the way cities must be to hold the weight of everything happening inside them simultaneously. Somewhere across the city, Ara was laughing at something the universe had arranged without being asked. Somewhere, a ledger was in the hands of people doing exactly what Chiamaka's father had intended when he stitched it into leather and ran out of time. Somewhere, a structure built entirely on manufactured grief was finishing its quiet, unspectacular collapse. Somewhere in the city, in a building with white walls and good light, Ara was probably already planning the next thing she would say into the air on the off chance the universe was still paying attention. Tae-oh thought she deserved to know it had been listening the whole time. He would tell her tomorrow. Tonight, the room was enough. Tonight, the woman whose hands knew his face better than any mirror ever had was enough. Tonight, for the first time in 11 years, the thing in his chest that had been braced for catastrophe was quiet. He held her face in his hands, and she covered them with hers, and neither of them said anything else because there was nothing left that needed saying. Some things, once chosen, don't require further language. They just require showing up, which they had both been doing, in different darknesses, from the beginning. Here, in this room, in light that was blurred and new and entirely enough. Two people stood in what they had chosen. Not safe, not uncomplicated, not the absence of consequence. Just true, just each other, just this. If this story wrecked you the way it was built to, subscribe. Leave a comment telling me whose decision you respected most and whose you'll never forgive. And send this to someone who needs to understand what it actually looks like when love is chosen in full knowledge of the cost. And here is the question that is going to live in your head tonight and probably tomorrow. Chiamaka knew Tae-oh's world blinded her before she ever told him. She chose to stay anyway. Was that strength? Or was it the most dangerous thing she ever did to herself? Drop your answer below. This comment section is about to be a war, and I am here for every word of it. And if you think you already know how you'd answer, read it back one more time, because the second time, Chiamaka hits different. She always did. She just needed you to stop watching her blindness and start watching her choices. That's where the whole story lives.